Let's talk more now about the police's handling of the Marikana Massacre. Paul Loest was the former tactical response team commander, and he was on the ground on the 16th of August. Paul, thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's talk about your reflections. It's been 10 years.
Yes, 10 years and not much has happened. None of us has really had closure. The families doesn't have closure. And even our guys from the police, we still don't know what really happened. And it's a sad state of affairs that everything that has happened has basically boiled down to the fact that we, the guys on the ground, got grilled. But upper echelon hierarchy, that not.
Paul, I know that you are load shed. I'm going to ask the team to try and re-establish a better connection with you, even if it means that we get you on the phone, because it's an important conversation as we talk about that day 10 years ago. I do understand that the rolling blackouts, in fact, have impacted you. And as, of course, the team says that they are trying to get hold of him. I mean, you go back to Marikana, for example, and you look back at the time the shooting was happening. There were quite a lot of questions that were to be asked even of those who were in charge at the time. You think back to someone like Zugi Swambombo, for example. She was the provincial commissioner of the police at the time. And she was also heard even in news interviews and that press conference talking about how today is the day we're going to end the violence, is D-Day. And that's also what the lawyers were arguing, to say that it's part of the reason police acted in the manner in which they did. But of course, there was quite a lot that was also said in the commission when it comes to how police handled this particular situation. You think of the fact that there was also the use of force, and that kind of force, a lot of questions being asked. How did police move to this particular part of the operation? You think back to someone like Colonel Duncan Scott, for example, who was taking police through the dispersal plan. So let's go back now to Paul Loest, who was also on the ground with people like Colonel Duncan Scott and various others who were also on the ground. And Paul, you were still talking to us before we got interrupted, because we do understand that you are impacted by the rolling blackouts. Let's talk about your reflections. You were saying that the guys on the ground got grilled. Talk to us more about that.
Anyway, like I said to you, even this morning, you know, that I still have the feeling that the whole Farnham Commission let us down, because anyone who ever wore uniform would know we don't act out of our own. We act according to instructions. And somewhere along the line, certain instructions were given, and the whole fact that we were told after the whole Farnham Commission was finalized and the findings were released, that there was no political interference. I'm sorry, I don't really know if that is really what has happened, because it just doesn't make sense to me.
Paul, one of the things that you talk about is the impact that this has had on the ground, and you say you don't believe that there was no political interference. So are you saying to us that you are certain that there was an instruction that came from somewhere to the police at the time to move to that tactical phase of their operation? And did you hear on the ground who had given this instruction?
No, basically I never heard anything of that sort. But, you know, in my clear mind, instructions come from somewhere. And with all respect to Ria Piega, she was never a career policewoman. You know, she never came through the ranks. So her knowledge with regard to what we did, even in that specialized environment, was extremely limited. So my common sense tells me somebody pushed her buttons. Who that person is, I've got no idea.
What about the provincial commissioner at the time? I mean, Zugi Swambombo, she's since retired, and very little is being said about her when it comes to, reflections on a day like this one. What role would she then have played 10 years ago because she was in charge of the police in the Northwest at the time.
Yes, that's also quite an interesting fact. I've got no idea where the instructions came from that she gave. But once again, you know what? When you've ever worn a uniform in your life, you know you don't question instructions, you follow it.
Let's go back, Paul, to 10 years, and let's talk about this operation. You are arriving in Marikana. It's Thursday. It's just before, in fact, not even just before 4 o'clock, because that's when it happened. Let's talk about the planning then, because when we go back to the commission, for example, you listen to Duncan Scott, he talks about drawing up the plan and how things were supposed to go. But very briefly, talk to us about the moments before then. What conversations were you having with your guys on the ground?
Okay, like I explained to a lot of the other people that have asked this question, we were never given any instruction that we will open fire. As I explained to some of the people that with any type of operation in that regard, we always have a tactical capability. There are always people available to be able to deal if something does go wrong in a certain extent. And I informed my guys. I said to them, you will not get an instruction to fire because we are all carrying live rounds. The tactical response teams, that is what they do. They apprehend dangerous criminals. And for some other reason, we were thrown in line. And I said to my guys, you will not get an instruction to fire. That I can guarantee you. But if you guys feel that your life is in danger, that's a different story. Then you apply the common law principle of self-defense and private defense. And then we stood and we waited. And the next moment, these guys came around the corner of the kraal and shots were fired. And the rest is all history.
Some have said, looking at the footage at the time, that it was just a pistol that was firing and the police should not have responded in the manner in which they did, and saying that their lives were not necessarily as in danger as they thought they were. How do you respond to that 10 years on, having reflected on what happened there?
You know what, there I would say the problem is that the guys that were deployed on that line were trained to deal with high-risk situations, not with crowds. There's a huge difference between the two. In my 30-odd years in the police, I dealt with crowds my whole career. And you have a different mindset. The members of POPs have a different mindset to dealing with crowds than the members of TRT. And in hindsight, they should have been kept completely. We should not have been on the front line. We should have been kept in reserve. We have spoken about this many times. There were too little POPs members. The POPs members weren't deployed correctly. They weren't trained correctly. And that all caused basically a huge mess. There's no other word to say of that.
Do you understand the anger directed at police, even on a day like this one, 10 years on, because people are still waiting for accountability and saying that there should have been people who are behind bars right now when it comes to the police?
I fully understand it, and I agree, and I feel exactly the same, because like I said to you this morning, we still we don't have closure. We don't know exactly what the real truth is. And referring back to pre-94, it's always the people right at the top that just gets off scot-free. And the guys on the ground, the guys that's actually doing the work, the career policeman that wants to make a difference, that wants to serve and wants to protect the community, gets the brunt. And I fully agree. I feel for the families and I feel for the victims. I feel for everyone. And there I include my own guys that were killed on the 13th, because that hasn't even been sorted out and then finalized.
In your view, who failed when it comes to ensuring that there should be accountability in this particular page of Marikana for South Africa?
My personal opinion is higher hierarchy. I can't really specifically point to a specific level of the echelon, but definitely high up. You know, they can't expect the police to go and deal with their internal problems that they don't solve themselves. And now they expect the police to deal with it. And then if we deal with it, you know, afterwards everybody points fingers, because decisions that we took within split seconds to act is now being drawn out in a commission for over 2+ years, and still no conclusion and still no answers.
When we go back to the footage of Marikana, for example, we can hear you among those people that are shouting, ceasefire, ceasefire. Do you think that the operation got so out of hand that even the commanders were not being listened to?
Yes, for sure. That is why I started shouting ceasefire, because I saw, you know, this is going to get completely out of hand, because these guys, most of the guys that were in line with me on that day were young guys. They basically in their 20s. This was the first time they've actually deployed into a highly volatile situation. And I think everybody was just scared because they didn't know what's going to happen, you know. And if reflecting back on what happened on the Monday when 2 of the guys got killed, and then proceeding after that during the week where more people were killed, everybody just, it was a panic situation.
You say they were in their 20s, some of them had not been exposed to such situations. So they then were also not adequately trained then, you would say?
Exactly, yes. I'm going to try and explain it to you in this way.
Yeah.
Members of POPs, after they've completed their basic training in public order policing, they get exposed to crowds. And over a certain period of time, you as an individual learn a certain amount of tolerance towards crowds. And you start accepting that when people talk to you, they don't actually talk to you as a person. They are not attacking you as a person. They're attacking the system. And you have to develop, I would almost say, a type of a thick skin to deal with these type of crowds and not take things personally. On the other hand, members of TRT are not trained in that situation. They are not tolerable towards crowds. And I think there, the whole thing just went wrong.
I'm going to ask you a final question then in 2 ways. What responsibility do you take for your men for what happened 10 years ago? And do you feel, as you alluded to a little earlier on in the conversation, like you've been made the fall guys?
As I said in previous interviews, the commands that I gave that day on the ground, I take full responsibility for. And I will stand by my guys, and I've said that hundreds of times, and I will look after them. And that's basically, I can't really say much more. Like I said, it's just, it's hurtful to know that this thing's been dragging on and on and on, and everybody on both sides of the spectrum is experiencing hurt and pain, and there's not, like I said, closure is not there yet. We and when I refer to we, I refer to us guys on the ground there that day, as well as the victims and the miners. Nobody has received closure, and things have not been finalized.
Paul, let me thank you for taking our call and speaking to us this evening. We do appreciate your time. That is Paul Loest, the former tactical response team commander, talking to us about the Marikana operation and how some of the guys were ill-prepared, you know, to deal with a crowd like this one, and says that, you know, they didn't have the required experience. Some of them had not even been exposed to such situations, saying that they've now been left as the guys on the ground to be grilled, and yet some of those in the upper echelons are not taking responsibility. That's what he says. So let's leave it there with him for now. We do appreciate your time, Paul.